wouldn't mind taking your seats. It's so brilliant to see people chatting. It's almost like a water cooler moment. Oh, sorry, that was really corny. So just to remind you, this is the Centre for Online and Distance Education, and it's brilliant to have you here and to have our online audience with us as well, and to have an international audience in the room with us today. Thank you very much. We've got an input now, which we're really excited about, and I'll leave my colleagues to introduce that. And then we're going to do an activity. Okay, after lunch, we're going to wake you up by getting you to move around and do a World Cafe activity. So there will be some opportunity to move around in a little while.
But you reliably informed me that we were going to leave 10 minutes at the end of the activity to have a break. So, yes. This afternoon's programme doesn't look quite as wall-to-wall as it might first appear, which means that you've got no excuse for not putting an enormous amount of energy into the activity, is the way I look at it. I don't know if it works that way. I'm going to hand over to you. Sorry, I sort of just...
Thank you, Dave. Dave already started introducing himself, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce Dave White. He's the head of digital education at the University of Arts London. He's the president of ALT, the Association for Learning Technology, and a principal fellow of the HEA, and he's well known for his influential work on digital visitors and residents, which has been an important intervention in reframing the idea of personal relationships with digital spaces away from the popular conception of personal innate facilities with digital technologies to a more contextual and purpose-based understanding of why we engage. Today, Dave is going to speak on the topic of deconstructing the digital water cooler, and I think, again, we'll be aiming to challenge and question assumptions that may be, in this case, quite close to our hearts. So without further ado, welcome Dave White.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, good post-lunch afternoon. This is something we'll rediscover as we do more face-to-face things, what it feels like to be just after lunch, if you know what I mean. And I feel like there is aircon in the building, but I feel like it's slowly giving up over the day, isn't it? It's just gradually getting warmer and warmer. So, you know, if any of you nod off, that's fine. So yeah, deconstructing the digital water cooler. I'm going to do that thing that everybody does, which is explain a little bit about my institution so that you know sort of my context. Not everybody's heard of the University of Arts London because we are 6 colleges and a bunch of institutes all spread around central London. It's Europe's biggest creative art and design focused higher education institution. It could be the world's biggest one, we're not sure. It's sort of 20 to 25,000 students. I have to say that because nobody can ever, you know, it's like working at university. Nobody can tell you how many students a university's got. It depends how you count it. And obviously, that was quite a challenging thing for through the pandemic for us. There's an interesting link between, say, art and design subjects and STEM subjects, which is a bit like labs, which was mentioned in the panel earlier, which is that, you know, there's a lot of kind of embodied practice, doing things with your hands, okay, which is always challenging when you get thrown online in the way that we did. So just harking back to those dark days for a second, there's something really interesting happened as soon as we all got thrown online. And I think it relates to the panel, which is to do with kind of conceptions of what education is and what universities might be. I think that, you know, that we have a kind of tacit understanding of what authentic education is that is still built from residential or physical education. And, you know, online education is still in the shadow of that. And I think this response during the pandemic sort of proves that, which is the kind of rough idea that if the buildings were closed, then somehow universities disappeared. And to my mind, that's because we don't, or at least mainstream culture doesn't conceptualize education and universities as anything other than in person, really. Even though we've been doing tons and tons and tons of digital stuff for years and years and years, like in the first keynote, where you can go back 30 years and find research that is perfectly applicable today. So I've been thinking about that because in my job, you know, I kept coming up against that in the pandemic and now. And this is where I got to. Everybody loves a Venn diagram, am I right? Okay, so this is mine. If you're at the back and it's not clear, then I just want you to know it's brilliant. It's an amazing diagram. Yeah, oh, you can see it, great. So I think we've kind of been meandering around this a little bit at various points today. But one of the things that I found useful when kind of approaching the way that we might sort of reimagine our institutions to include the digital in perhaps more fundamental ways, is that our institutions are both educational institutions, but they're also cultural institutions. And what I've found over recent years is rather than, it's been a long time since I've been in a discussion where somebody said, well, you can't do online education, it doesn't make any sense. I think that's gone, okay, which meant some of us had to sort of pull back from evangelism mode, if you like. But what I've found is that quite often we're having discussions on two completely different coordinates. So a lot of us in this room would perhaps talk about what works online, what's effective pedagogy, what helps keep our students motivated and engaged, as obviously a lot of the talks today are talking about. But sometimes you'll be having that discussion with someone who sees university predominantly as a cultural rite of passage. And that's why that debate goes a little bit strange, okay? I think in the UK, you know, mainstream media, mainstream culture tends to conceptualize universities as Oxbridge, sort of Russell Group, you know, lawns and mortarboards and things like that. And we still sort of build up, there's still an assumption somewhere in there that we are responding to, you know, 18 to 21-year-olds who've moved city and are building their lives around their studies. Whereas any of us who do sort of online or distance learning know that that's not really the case. And Steve on the panel put stats up, you know, their average age of their students is 35, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder whether, you know, the way that online gets responded to is still with a kind of implicit idea of a model of education that is residential and a conceptualization of a student that's very specific. And it's just as much about a rite of passage as it is a cultural rite of passage as it is about intellectual development. Okay, and I think it's great that universities are both of those things. We've just got to be really careful about what dimension we're having that discussion on. I better go slightly faster. Okay, so with that in mind, we've been undertaking, so we've done some research at my institution, okay? So we're looking at, hello online people, this is probably being recorded, isn't it? So I need to be careful about what I say about my institution. University Arts London is really good. It is really good, genuinely. I love working there. No, genuinely, no, I'm making it worse now, aren't I? So we are interested in fully online distance learning at the University Arts London, some of which is because of what we learned during the pandemic, if you like. So we already actually have quite a lot of fully online distance learning in the shape of master's courses and some pre-degree stuff. But we're looking at a kind of new sort of reimagined version of that online education in the same way a lot of people are. And so we've undertaken these pedagogic research activities, which are 15 3-week teaching and learning experiments for participants to take. We had about 300 participants. We've just finished them now. So some of what I'm going to show you is data from that. Okay, so that's been really, really useful. And that's part of what I'm going to use to kind of respond to the kind of title of the talk. Right, that word in the middle, I learned how to pronounce it before the talk and now I've forgotten. Okay, any takers? Come on, shout out.
It's from synecdoche, so it's synecdochic.
Synecdochic. Right, we're happy with that. Is everybody comfortable with that as a pronunciation of that? Right, okay. So the reason that I've used that and the reason that I wanted to use the idea of the water cooler is because I think certainly over the pandemic, there was this, it became that word, it became a kind of symbol of what we'd lost, and it became a symbol of the informal, and it became a kind of symbol of that kind of a form of belonging and sense of togetherness that perhaps we'd lost by being online. But what I want to do is sort of pull that apart, because actually I think it's a slightly dangerous assumption on a number of different levels. The first one is belonging is really inconvenient, okay? Let me explain. This is a kind of strong and weak relationships bonds sort of type argument, if you like. So often the things that we belong to the most are the things we have very little choice in. So family, for example, you might feel a massive sense of belonging to your family, but it doesn't mean that you get on with everyone. It's just you sort of have to, right? You have to do the birthdays and the parties and the marriages and all the rest of it. Yeah. If you live in a tiny little village, you sort of have to get on with your neighbours because they're the only people that are there. But it doesn't mean that you like them, but it could create a real strong sense of belonging. Okay. What somebody in one of my colleagues said, sometimes she feels that you get a real sense of belonging on courses because they're so awful. Okay, because you get that kind of, well, we've just got to survive this, guys, you know, and so you really pull together, right? And that's true. I mean, you do get a sense of belonging when you face really difficult times. So belonging is inconvenient. If you are part of a club or a society or a sports club or whatever, then somebody's got to put the chairs out, somebody's got to make the tea, you've got to do the training, you've got to turn up at a particular time. Okay. Now, belonging is a good thing, but it is not a wonderful thing on that level, right? So I think we have to be careful about that. I also think the reason that we think about belonging a lot is because, again, it's modeled around that traditional residential 18-year-old has left home sort of concept of education. So on that, so this is I'm just proposing this as an idea, really, that there is a bit of a conundrum there, which is there's a drive to make education more and more flexible within the same regulatory framework, but I'm not going to talk about that, right? But anybody who's involved in this understands that that can sometimes be quite difficult. There's this drive for flexibility so that we can be more inclusive, especially with online learning. But does that flexibility reduce the opportunity for belonging because everybody can operate in their own way? Or you could say, does learner personalization, is that the antithesis of belonging? So I do think it's a bit of a conundrum. I think there are ways through it with good design, but it's worth questioning. So in terms of our study, our research, that says, let me read it off here. How do you feel about the connections you built this week with your tutors and fellow participants? So this is a kind of post survey. Relatively small numbers so far, because we're still doing it. But my point here is not so much the numbers and the fact that clearly we've done a brilliant job, because look how good that is. It's more that I was more interested in using the term connected or connections than belonging. I have this theory that we ask students whether they felt like they belong to our institution and courses, but we don't ask them whether they want to belong or how they feel about belonging. Okay. So it's just one of those big bucket terms. Flexibility is another one, isn't it? It's one of those classic kind of education bucket terms that we don't necessarily pick through properly. So I think connections are a more useful way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it that I hope is helpful. This is myself and Dave Cormier, who's the guy who came up with the acronym Mooc years and years and years ago, came up with this term eventedness, which at the time was not a real word, but now a number of people have written academic papers about it, so it is a real word, because that's how it works, right? And it's essentially this feeling that you've been at an event, right? That you've been together at a particular moment in time, and when you reflect back on the week, you can go, oh yeah, I did that thing with those people, which is like this, right? So in a physical room, it's that sort of comes for free. Online, you have to really deliberately design it. I think the concept of event is quite useful in terms of how we design learning. You know, what's the mix between completely at your own pace and events in any chunk of learning? I think it gets us out of the sort of what's the pedagogy of a lecture. I sort of don't mind what the pedagogy of a lecture is, but what I mind is how evented it was, right? And then this concept of togetherness. So I do think that learners want to feel a sense of togetherness at certain moments. And I wonder whether that's more important to a lot of our learners than the concept of than belonging. Especially if our learners are perhaps a little bit older, they've already got a life, they've already belonged to the social groups and communities, they're already working, they've got lots of places they belong, right, already. do they have the time to inconveniently belong to our institution as well? I'm not saying belonging is a bad thing, just to be clear, but I'm wondering whether there are more nuanced dimensions of it that could be more useful when we're thinking about what we're designing. It's a bit like that idea that somebody usefully came up with recently, which is that all students want to matter to their institution. I'm going to put that out there because it's warm and why not, is I sometimes wonder whether we have this habit of going to the most esoteric version of a concept, like belonging, as a way of avoiding more simple but boring things like mattering. So we spend a lot of time worrying about belonging, and there are various things that we probably should be doing that actually would make the students feel more like they matter to us. When I say we, I'm not going to define what that is, because again, why would I? So there are really interesting modes of presence online. There are multiple different modes of presence that can lead to togetherness in different ways, okay? Rather than the kind of mirroring of the face-to-face. I love this report. This came out very recently, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to publish. It's not my work, but I'm hoping that we, UAL, will be able to publish it openly. It was like a forensic look at what was happening in synchronous online sessions. And this is a screen grab of one of the sort of text chats. And so how's that for an interesting sort of dimension of togetherness? This is translanguaging within the text chat whilst the session's going on, okay, which I think is fascinating. And obviously that can't really, there's no version of that. You don't really get a version of that in a face-to-face setting. So I think we've got multiple ways of engaging our students now, but we haven't got very sophisticated ways of deciding whether they're good, which I think was a lot of what the panel was about. Same report, something slightly different. Was looking at various conversations that were taking place, and this section of the report was just called "Okay, We're Listening." And I think it's a really good example of how engaging students shifts slightly online, but can be incredibly positive. So instead of the tutor constantly chipping in and going, yeah, oh, that's interesting, blah, 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 they just left a gap. And about 5 times they'd say, we're listening, and it just created an enormous amount of confidence in the student. So there are just these various different ways that we can create presence and create togetherness in terms of teaching practices. Well, I'm not doing as badly as I thought I was doing, so that's good, isn't it? I'll just take a breath. Oh, it looks really horrible. Those colours look really horrible. They look horrible on my screen as well. It's just a bad choice. It's virtually illegible. So that says serendipity as privilege, okay? So just come back to the water cooler, okay? I feel like serendipity is a term used by people that are in privileged positions to pretend that good stuff happened by accident when it actually happened because they were in a privileged position, right? So that kind of idea of, well, it's important that we have those water cooler moments because that gives us these moments of serendipity. And remember when we had that conversation, if we hadn't had it, then the project would have all gone horribly wrong and whatever it might be, okay? That's true. But I would ask the question, who gets to stand near the water cooler? You know, who has the right to do that? Who's in a position to do that? Who's in a position to be able to take the time to operate like that? Who's allowed into that room, right? So whilst I do think that the informal is really important, a little bit like belonging being inconvenient, having the time and the opportunity to engage with the informal there's only certain people who have the opportunity to do that, right? So you can't build a whole system around it because you just privilege a very particular set of people. So a lot of online learners, obviously, they'll have caring responsibilities, they'll have a day job. And I think I've variously learned this over the years. If you create a space where you go, we're just creating a space for you as students to get together and chat about stuff, it never quite works because actually they've got plenty of other things they need to be doing, if you like. So again, I'm not saying that serendipity is a bad thing. I'm just saying let's not assume that it's a 100% good thing in the way that it's worked out. I think the way that we think of serendipity, it does hark back to kind of quite traditional sort of non-massified versions of higher education. And this is some more data from our research, is we're beginning, because you talk about flexibility, and certainly at my institution, there's quite a lot of talk about flexibility as academic choice, sort of stackable, flexible, you know, you can move from, you can do any one of these 5 modules or 3 pathways or whatever it might be. I do think obviously that's very valuable. What we're getting back from the research is that flexibility on pace is way more important. So being able to study when works for you, if you like. I think we know that, but I think it's just the emphasis there. So that's one of the reasons why I was questioning the concept of belonging, because actually I think I might be right. We've still got to do a bit more work on this, but I think given the choice, students would prefer to have flexibility of pace over and above the opportunity to belong, as long as there's some togetherness. That sentence got longer and longer, didn't it? Okay. You still with me? Yeah, I think so. Okay. So here's an example of that, which is this idea of not working. I've chosen a really terrifying quote from this, by the way. If you read it, it's kind of full on. And if you know Yeats, then it's super full on. That's the little red highlighted bit there. But this, when I was thinking this through, it reminded me of this from Engelstrom, which is the idea of not works, which is the sense that actually, whether it's for intellectual development or work, or however you see the difference between those two things, actually more and more we get thrown together into different mixes of people, you know, different teams, different contexts, to respond to different challenges, problems, opportunities. And actually, I think a lot of us, it's a bit like an attribute, isn't it? The ability to get to form a team and create trust within that team and a sense of togetherness very quickly to respond to something relatively specific and then disband. I think that's the way the future is looking. So in that sense, that's why I think we need to be focusing on notions of presence and togetherness rather than this kind of belonging to an institution, if you like. Because I think that concept of belonging to an institution it comes from a previous era where more of a kind of job for life era. I think our students and us, we need to be sort of more agile on that basis. So the not working, and it is with a K, is quite a useful idea from that point of view. I know that our students are interested in that because they recognize that that's what they'll need to do, not least of which because a lot of our students go on to form their own businesses or act as freelancers. So they're not expecting to walk into some kind of hierarchical, super secure career pathway sort of job. I'm not sure anybody is now. Okay, so this is my last slide, and this frames the activity we're about to do, and it also leaves a couple of minutes for questions. So when thinking about kind of responding to all of this and the idea of innovation, you know, the theme for the conference being accelerating innovation, I came up with these kind of 3 headlines, if you like. So the first one, and this is what we'll be discussing on tables in a second, is authentic pedagogy. I think we know what effective pedagogy is. I think, you know, harking back to the research, I think we actually know how to do this stuff really, really well. There's a more subtle question, which is, what do people consider to be authentic pedagogy, which is a slightly different thing, and what has become authentic over the pandemic? The second one, so that's one territory. What do you think's become authentic over the pandemic in terms of pedagogy? The second one is sustaining practices. That first Venn diagram had sustainability on the bottom of it. It's not sustainability in a kind of climate crisis sense. It's sustainability of us and our students. So I think we've got quite good at delivering really, really good online education, but we've not necessarily figured out how to do it sustainably without just sort of burning out, if you like. So I do think a really important question for the future is, what does it look like to operate sustainably professionally? And then the last one, because I love a bit of this, is structural rewiring, which is, you want to go to this table if you just want a really good constructive moan about your institution, right? I've given the game away there, which is, you know, what big structural things need to be rewired? There was somebody on the panel talking about focusing on assessment, which I think is a really interesting aspect of that, which is we can do all the things, but unless we sort of modify assessment practices, how far are you going to get, would be an example of that. So that's what I'd like us to think about as we go into the activity. Shall I leave a second for questions?
Yes.
Okay, questions.
So we've got a couple of questions online, but there's something a bit truncated here.
I'm happy with a truncated question as long as I can stop answering halfway through a sentence.
Okay, we've got in the serendipity part, working at my own pace is important. Being able to communicate in a way that works for me. Why would anyone answer not important? Were you more trying to measure the levels of the response? Yeah,
I mean, you know, there are other bits of that question that I didn't put up on screen. But yeah, I think that's a fair sort of comment, which is that no, let me think about that for a second. I think if you ask people, do they want things to be flexible on pace, they will say yes, and that's fair, yes. So it's a slightly wonky question from that point of view. If you ask people, do they want to belong, they might say yes, right? They might not. I think my point is those two things are possibly in tension. So a highly individualized, flexible on pace learning design might well erode the potential for belonging. And you could argue it's the whole of the human condition now with the internet, isn't it? Everything's hyper individualized and super flexible, and you can do anything when you want. But and it kind of takes away. It gives you a lot more choice, but potentially at the expense of belonging. But again, I come back to the point that belonging is inconvenient. Given the choice, this is my final answer. Given the choice, I think we'll always choose convenience over belonging. I think that's where I've got to with it. But it doesn't mean we won't be sad.
There's a hand up in the audience.
Sorry, this is great, thank you. I'm going to apologise initially because I think my thoughts are completely organised yet. So I've got a few questions. Firstly, I just want to quickly jump on that though. You just said about working at my own pace is important, and why would anyone say that's not important? I definitely have colleagues and friends who have ADHD or something similar to neurodivergent who would say they would like to be directed with their pace of learning.
Yeah.
And if they learn, then learn.
Yeah.
Otherwise, though, listening to you, I think I've worked out that my definition of belonging doesn't match with yours.
Okay.
Simply because it clashes with what you said about serendipity.
Yeah.
So when you said about who gets to stand by the water like that, for me, maybe people wouldn't because they don't feel like they belong, i.e. they stand out or they would feel like they don't belong. So what is your definition of belonging?
Oh, well, you've asked the hardest question. It's like the way we never define education. I'm going to be a little bit twisty and say that's part of the problem with the concept, which is that it's one of those ones that's like holding on sand, it just slips through your fingers. So I think that your thinking is really helpful because you're thinking about it in terms of access and inclusion. And actually, that I think that's a useful way of taking it forward, is to say, well, let's stop talking about belonging without describing it, which I might just have done for 20 minutes, sorry guys, and concentrate on access and inclusion. Now, this relates to, on your first point about pace, I think there's a difference between pace and structure. And one of the things we've been discussing in my team is the single biggest dimension of inclusivity is having a well-structured course that people can then plan around, and they know what they're expected to do when. So I think, again, you've sort of accurately picked me up on not defining things clearly. So as long as we think that there's a difference between pace and structure, then I think it makes sense. But yes, I'd much prefer to be talking about access and inclusion than about belonging, and perhaps belonging is a corollary of that. I still think the water cooler is a slightly troublesome concept, even within all that. But yeah, you're going to have to decide.
It was great to see your slide with the percentage of students who agreed with the questions about place of study, or having your own, being able to study when you want to. But I suppose it raises for me some of the bigger questions that we sometimes grapple with around what is the role of student opinion in relation to effective pedagogy. So what I don't want to say is students don't really know what they want. But I do think that there is somewhere on that spectrum of we dictate entirely, or students dictate entirely by answering questions like the one you put there. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, I think students know what they like, but I don't think they necessarily know what they need necessarily. I mean, this is a permanent ongoing debate at my institution because of the kind of arts focus, which is the, to what extent should learning be stressful and slightly anxious, right? And I think the best answer I've ever heard to that is that there are good forms of anxiety and bad forms of anxiety, like being worried about whether you can creatively respond to a brief, but understanding the brief is fine. Not being able to understand the brief or not knowing which room you're supposed to be going to or what link to click on is the wrong kind of anxiety. So there's that. I see it as kind of student voice rather than student opinion. I think what's important is that the student voice is integral, but then it's our job to interpret that, isn't it? So I've got learning designers in my team. They're going to design a pedagogic model that responds to the research, but they're not, we're not at that design process isn't entirely about keeping students happy, if you like. There's a difference between an engaged student and a happy student. I just think happiness is a weird dimension for pedagogy in some ways. And I'm more interested in things like togetherness, presence, engagement, motivation. Perhaps those things add up to happiness, if you like. So yeah, you have to listen to the student voice, but you can decide what you do with that voice, I'd say.
I think I kind of need to move.
That's fine.
To the next session. Dave will still be with us for that, so plenty of time to keep discussing these thoughts. But for now, we say thanks very much, Dave, for your presentation.